Good afternoon. I'm Brad Pollina. We're here for another episode of Two Lawyers Walk Into a Bar. And I'm here with my good friend and fellow Suffolk County commuter, Josh Wurtzel. How's it going, Josh?
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is one of the first ones we've done, not only together, but in the in-office podcast booth, which is fun. I've done a lot of these, like I think you have behind a computer screen, but I think it's much more fun to just sit down and kind of just chat. So, Josh, you've been a partner at Schlam Stone Dolan for how long?
2017, so just over 8 years, 8.5 years.
All right, and I think you just told me before we came on, you graduated law school 2013, which is my grad year also. So what you did the big law thing for 3-4 years, I guess?
Yeah, I was an associate at Weil Gotshal. I was actually doing securities litigation there. And the group, at least at the time, was securities litigation and corporate governance. So it had a federal securities cases, and then, which is primarily what I did, and then corporate governance, a lot of derivative cases, and deal cases. And we just happened to have a handful of cases, or a few cases that really were more general commercial litigation that my group was doing with the general commercial litigation group. And that's kind of what sparked my interest in general commercial litigation, which is, ultimately what I came to do.
Right. So I will say this is like a LinkedIn friendship come to life, right? I started following you on LinkedIn. You started following me. We knew some of the same people, commented on each other's stuff.
From LinkedIn.
From LinkedIn. I think it was another lawyer, an L&T lawyer that I called for advice about something. And I knew him from LinkedIn because he gave me a shout out and he said, "Oh, do you know Josh Wurtzel?" And I actually said, not personally, but I've seen him on LinkedIn. And then I shot you an email and we lived happily ever after.
Yeah.
So I know a little bit about your practice from what I see on LinkedIn. It looks like you do a lot of the same things we do, at least from my perspective. Commercial real estate litigation, some kind of, closely held corporate disputes and things like that. But why don't you tell me what's keeping you busy these days?
Sure. So I would say probably 2/3 of my practice now is commercial real estate litigation. Just last week, I was in San Diego at the ICSC conference. So a lot of real estate lawyers. So, 2/3 is real estate litigation. A good chunk of that is commercial leasing litigation on the landlord side. And probably more than half of that 2/3 bucket right now is commercial lending litigation. And I represent both borrowers and lenders and guarantors in all sorts of commercial lending litigation. We've done a bunch of UCC foreclosures, mortgage foreclosure defense. I have a bunch of guarantee litigation. And especially nowadays with interest rates being what they are, and especially office properties significantly declining in value over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of litigation arising out of commercial lending activity. So a lot of foreclosures, UCC foreclosures, litigation related to UCC foreclosures, and then certainly guarantor liability, and litigation related to that.
So I think what I would really love to discuss with you is your path in your current firm to partnership and kind of how you distinguished yourself within the firm, but also how you made yourself visible as a lawyer in the New York real estate litigation market. So you went to Schlam Stone in, would you say 2017?
2017.
As an associate, right?
Correct.
So what did you do to succeed at the firm, to distinguish yourself at the firm? I don't know what your firm's requirements are in terms of, getting elevated, whether there's a counsel level, before you get to partner, the types of things you need to do in terms of business generation. Maybe you could walk us through your path a little bit.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the main thing is being the loudest person in the room oftentimes, right? And that's true on the litigation front, on the business generation front. You have to be the strongest voice, as you know, right, as a litigator. So you and I have talked about this a lot. When you've got a litigation issue, right, you often are always looking for opportunities to become more aggressive and to come over the top with the other side. So that's been my philosophy really from the beginning as a litigator. And I've grown up at Schlam Stone and my current firm with mentors who shared that view and probably reinforced it, perhaps to some extent to a fault. Really, how did I come up? I think it's by being a good litigator. My firm, as a small firm, we're about 25 lawyers, give or take at any time. So it really is a meritocracy. It's not hierarchical in the way that you would normally think of a firm hierarchy. It's not like, well, you're a fourth year, so you do this, and you're a seventh year, so you do this, and you're a partner, so you do this. Really, everybody gets the type of work that they show they're able to do. And really within the first 6 months, I was supervising people who were senior to me, partners that were working on cases that maybe I was directing, which coming from a big firm sounded crazy, right?
Everything's hierarchical. The first year drafts a cover letter that the third year reviews, and then it goes to the senior, and only once 3 people have looked at it can the partner look at it, right?
Right, right.
Then it goes to the client.
Correct. I mean, we're not like that. So, really it's a collaborative working environment. And, I give work to more junior associates who have shown they have the ability to do it that I wouldn't give to somebody more senior. And, just because you're more senior than someone else doesn't mean that you're directing that person. And I know when I was interviewing at boutique firms, that was something that I heard a lot from the lawyers who were interviewing me, that it's not hierarchical and, your class year doesn't really matter, at least for purposes of, how you do work and how you work with other people. But really you don't understand that coming from a big firm until you actually practice in that environment. So that's the environment that we have. And that, for somebody who is looking, or certainly for myself, somebody who was looking to try to do more substantive work, and coming from a big firm, being a mid-level associate, you do certain types of things. And then within the first 6 months, I was arguing substantive motions in front of the commercial division, the appellate division. I did my first trial within the first 2 years of being there, where I was running the trial. So really being given the opportunity, and for that, I'm grateful. I'm grateful to my firm for giving me that opportunity. And then obviously the second half is being able to execute. And, fortunately for myself, for my clients, I was able to do that.
Yeah, so I want to stick with that for a minute. I mean, thinking back to myself, not too long ago, I think we've been practicing the same amount of time, I guess about 12 and a half years. About halfway through that, I remember there came a time where I felt like I was probably a loud voice in the room, and people were giving me opportunities to do stuff because I showed I was invested in the cases, and I cared about the clients, and I wanted to argue motions. So I remember 1 or 2 instances where someone more senior basically kind of like threw me a bone, threw me an opportunity to argue a complicated motion and kind of see how I did with it. And that was a little bit of a breakthrough moment. Do you, looking back, I don't know if it was at Weil or at your current firm, can you think of any experiences you had where basically someone a little more senior to you said, look, I'm going to take a risk on you. I haven't known you that long. You haven't been here that long. You're still pretty junior, but I want you to argue this summary judgment motion, or I want you to take this impactful deposition. Was there any moment where you kind of look back and you think that's where things really started to pick up speed for me?
Yeah, when I was at Weil, I think I was a third-year associate at the time, and we had a big securities case that had a bunch of non-party depositions. And, when you're at a big firm, very rarely is it as a young associate, a junior associate, do people say, okay, you're going to take this deposition, you're going to draft this brief, you'll be given work to do. But when you want that higher level, more substantive work, you have to ask for it, you have to fight for it sometimes. And I remember asking whether I could take one of these depositions, and there was some internal discussion about it, and the answer came back yes. And then several of the other associates at my level also took depositions at that time, but it was only because I asked. And I think that's generally true at big firms, but even at boutique firms, it's very easy for a partner or a more senior person to just kind of assume they're going to do whatever depositions or arguments. And I have people now who are more junior who come to me and say, can I argue this motion? Can I take the lead on this? And for the most part, I appreciate when they ask those things, and I almost always say yes, as long as it's something that's appropriate for them to do. So I think that for me, it was asking and seeking out that work, and seeking out, really figuring out what you want out of your own career, and then recognizing that nobody else is going to fight for it other than you, and you have to do that. And, for the most part, what's the worst that happens? You ask, can I take this deposition? And someone says, no, I'm sorry.
It stings for a minute. You feel like, oh, the grown-ups in the room are going to deal with this one, and they kind of put me in my place. But that's your downside.
You have to be able to get over that, So I joke, I used to be a telemarketer when I was in college for a mortgage company.
So you can deal with rejection.
Yeah, I always liked it. Nobody likes being yelled at and hung up on, but I didn't mind it because it just meant I would move on to the next call faster. I didn't have to waste my time trying to discuss something with someone, and they were being polite, but there was no chance of them buying whatever I was selling and so on. So I think accepting rejection is part of being able to advance in any career. career. And, I don't want to say that telemarketing is what leads to success as a lawyer, but, being able to accept rejection and take a little bit of a risk and ask your supervisor, or the partner you're working with, hey, can I argue this motion? Maybe 4 out of 5 times they'll say, no, I'm sorry, you can't do it. But then all you need is the one time. And then once you get going, once you get on a roll, then it's a lot easier for them to say yes the next time.
It's a snowball effect. I experienced that. It sounds like you experienced it. Once you do a good job on one or two of them, you're making the lives of the more senior people much easier. The clients are probably paying a lower hourly rate. But truthfully, when I think about we're growing this firm where we are doing this podcast right now, I want people that can come in and do the depositions, do the arguments. I really don't want there to be a question about it. For the firm to be successful, we have to have people that can do that. So when you went to your current firm, I assume that it was day one, things were a little different, right? You're not working with Wall Street investment banks anymore. You're working with big, important clients, but you don't have 8 layers of review ahead of you. The depositions are going to be a little more approachable. Was that sort of your experience? Not as difficult to get an oral argument to do. It's sort of like if the work's there, somebody needs to do it, and it might as well be you, right? And if you can show you're competent, which I'm sure you had no problem doing in a pretty short amount of time. So was that sort of like when you went to your current firm, I think you said, within a few months, things sort of picked up steam for you. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, on my first day, another associate handed me a Redwell. This was, back in the day when people would take Redwells to court. And he said, well, here's all the emails and relevant documents for this one case. So when you go to court, you can just take this with you. And I remember thinking, what do you mean I'm going to court? I'm going by myself. I'm not going with someone else.
It was expected.
Yeah. And at a boutique firm, when we hire people, we hire them with the expectation that on day one, they have the ability to draft briefs. They have the ability to go to court. They have the ability to appear and engage with clients. And, look, I'm not going to entrust, an important substantive oral argument on the most important motion in the most important case to the third-year associate. That's probably something I'm going to handle myself. I am going to entrust to the associates and the new people that we hire to be able to handle depositions, to be able to handle meet and confers with opposing counsel, to be able to draft briefs and really manage the deadlines and run the cases with oversight, but to be able to be the day-to-day person. And, I think when I would interview, I would tell people I want to do that type of work. And I expected that. But when it actually happened, really from day one, that was when I realized, well, I'm not a big firm associate anymore. I'm a real lawyer.
Yep. So let's talk about what I think you're very excited to talk about, which is marketing, business development, growing a book of business. Can you kind of walk us through, like, what's your journey been like? Did it start at Weil? Did it start at your current firm? What have you done? Aside from being like the most active person on LinkedIn that I could possibly imagine, what have you done to really grow your own book, bring clients in, and kind of like, it's a whole other side of things that they don't teach you in law school, right? You don't learn it at a big firm. Kind of hard to bring in an investment bank as a client when you're a second-year associate. But once you're, at least in my view, once you're at a smaller firm, a boutique firm, you kind of get unleashed a little bit. The leash is taken off. So why don't you tell us about, your experience with growing a book?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the first piece is doing good work, right? Nobody hires you, as you know. Nobody hires you to be their lawyer just because, you post on LinkedIn. I think as I've gotten more senior, a lot of the referrals that come to me come from other lawyers I've worked with, right? Either on opposite cases or as co-counsel. And to me, that's the best type of referral that you can get.
It's a real vote of confidence. Someone that was across the table from you and probably couldn't stand you for 6 months or a year.
We had a case where we actually brought a lawsuit against the lawyers on the other side, and there were sanctions motions. It was an incredibly contentious case, and we ended up resolving the case in our client's favor. And I remember years later getting a call from one of those lawyers on the other side about a potential new matter and saying, well, remember when you brought this lawsuit and you did this to us? I was wondering if you could do that to somebody else. And, to me, that was like the greatest feeling.
That's a great compliment.
I mean, look, they were pissed off at the moment when it was happening, but I think and this happens all the time, they recognized the value and they recognized what was being done, and they saw that it was effective in that instance. And they thought, well, maybe we can replicate this going forward. And that's my favorite. I know that doesn't really answer your question, but that's my favorite type of referral to get from someone that you've worked with and has been impressed and has actually seen you in action. And for me, when I make referrals, it's always the easiest to refer to somebody that you've seen in action.
No, I think I agree. I agree with that. The experience that you're relaying to me is something that I've experienced too. You sort of have to get out there and do the work. You start one day with 0 clients, but you go to court, you write briefs, you post a little bit about it online, and people see what you're doing. And bonus points if you get a good result, right? You're not always going to get a good result, but if you try hard and you're thorough in your research and you're good on your feet, somebody is going to see it, whether it's another lawyer or an adversary, and they're gonna talk. They're going to come back to you. They're going to tell another lawyer. So yeah, I think that's a real phenomenon that starts to happen. Even though it doesn't feel like you're building a book, by litigating the actual cases, you kind of are it's a long game, right? Let's talk about your LinkedIn presence, I guess. Have you had people call you or email you or reach out to you and say, I saw something you did on LinkedIn, or I didn't realize that you did real estate litigation. I didn't know that you did workouts. I saw it on LinkedIn. Can we talk, or can I pass your name on? Like, what kind of dividends have you seen? Maybe none, but what kind of dividends have you seen from putting the time in and the effort in on LinkedIn?
Yes, I've had several instances in which someone calls me and says, hey, I saw you on LinkedIn. I saw you posted this. Can we talk about this particular case? Very rarely is it a cold call where someone just happens. And I guess the nature of LinkedIn is that most of the time or at least indirectly know the people that you're seeing on there.
You're within a few degrees of separation. Right. Maybe I know you and you know somebody and we're 2 degrees apart, but they saw something I did.
Right. But I mean, the beauty of LinkedIn and really social media in general is that it allows you to share and speak to a lot of different people at one time. Right. So that doesn't mean necessarily, posting 20 times a day, these crazy rants, but targeted value adding posts where you're sharing an article where, I like to do the videos. I put up these short videos a couple times.
Let's talk about the videos. I love what you're doing with the videos, and I've never done videos myself, but what I like what you're doing in terms of, it seems like you're kind of, what I imagine is happening is some idea pops into your head. Oh, let's talk about motions to compel today. Let's talk about good guy guarantees today. Or let's talk about, what's a non-party deposition? And you go on and you just talk about it for 5 minutes, right? When did you start doing those? And like, what kind of prompted you to do that? And how has that helped your brand building and book building pursuit?
And so it was last summer that I started doing the videos. I had seen people do them for a long time before that. I always thought they were very good. I liked watching them. I just had never done it myself. And I started out literally with an iPhone on top of a bookshelf. I didn't even have something to hold my phone, filming these videos and trying to edit them. And, I've gotten a little bit more sophisticated, but perhaps not all that much. I've started doing these videos and really just topics that came to mind that, something I was working on, something that, I dealt with, something that I saw in the newspaper. And I started to get feedback of people saying, look, I love to see these videos. I love to see the analysis. And a lot of times I try to take current events or something that you read about in the paper and try to give a legal spin to it. For example, there was a Disney case that was all over where someone was suing Disney because his wife, I think, died as a result of an allergic reaction at a restaurant. And Disney was moving to compel arbitration based on an arbitration agreement in the Disney Plus contract that the person just agreed
I saw
to,
that video.
10 years earlier, right?
Yep.
And when you see it in the paper, like, oh, this is ridiculous. How can a Disney Plus contract relate to a dispute that happens at the park? But it's an interesting legal question. And, most of the articles that you read are just reporting the facts. And even when you read in Law 360, about half the time they get the legal analysis right. And, the other half, it might be a little bit off. So I always appreciate when you have when you see videos of people presenting a legal issue and they get it right. They pick out the nuances in the law and they can say, look, this is what's being reporting. Is that crazy? Can this really happen? Actually, no, it's not that crazy. It happened here, 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 and here, and here's why. And I think people appreciate that, and certainly as a lawyer, I get feedback from people saying, this is interesting. I'm a transactional lawyer, and I love to see the litigation videos, and I love to see the strategy and the way that you think about things. So, I certainly have gotten phone calls from people who've seen the videos and said, hey, I didn't know you did this type of work, or that was a really interesting concept. Can we talk about it? And there is direct business that has come from that, but I think there's also a lot of indirect business in that with the power of social media, it allows you to stay top of mind with people and for them to see you speaking and doing things when they might not otherwise have had that opportunity.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I mean, the I didn't know you did this is a real thing. Someone reaches out and says, I didn't know you did real estate litigation, or I didn't know you did construction litigation. And had they looked, they would know, but they just haven't thought about you. And it's someone from law school, someone I worked with 10 years ago called me with a case that wound up becoming one of our biggest, most important cases. And it started off with, I didn't know you did this until I saw some, in my mind, corny thing that I posted on LinkedIn. What other kinds of things are you doing, if anything, besides, LinkedIn to help build a brand and build a book of business? Like, what other efforts are you putting your mind to?
So, I mean, I really started out doing a networking group. I joined BNI back in probably 2017 when I joined Schlam Stone.
In the city or out on Long Island?
In the city.
Okay.
So I don't do the networking groups anymore. Did BNI probably for 6 or 7 years. And, it taught me how to formally network with people. And I remember at the beginning, hey, my dad has been in BNI for a long time. I remember people saying to me, I don't know if you'll make any money. I don't know if you'll get any referrals because, whether the BNI model worked for my type of practice, which is, commercial litigation, commercial real estate litigation. And I remember saying at the outset, look, I'm not, it would be great to get referrals and make money, but really what I'm looking for is to learn how to network. I've never done this before. I started at a big firm. They don't teach associates how to develop business.
How do you formally network? What did they teach you?
Well, and the main thing is you have these meetings every week. You make referrals to other people, and BNI is very big into you track referrals, you track what's coming in, what's going out, and but really the way to develop professional relationships, and it's in many ways it's really the same as dating. I always try to compare it to that, with the caveat that I don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to dating, but you go on these lunches with people, and it's really like a date. How can I help you? How can you help me? And the networking group really teaches you how to do that, right? It forces you to engage with people, and it forces you to actually go out and get coffee, get drinks, get lunch, and to have more than just a social relationship, but a professional business relationship. And I would say the majority of my relationships, for better or worse, nowadays are professional business relationships, right? There's a friendship, but there's also a business relationship. And, how can I help you grow your business? And, here's what I'm looking to do, and how can we work together?
Yeah. So one of the things that, your current firm is a little bigger than ours. We're 10 or 11 people. You're, what'd you say, 25 people. So this dynamic may not fit exactly, but I wonder when you move to a smaller firm, if you experienced, look, I need to pick people's brains about things. There aren't always a million people in a small firm you can ask about stuff. So one thing that has been important to me since I came here from a much larger firm, a series of much larger firms, is who outside the firm can I call, text, grab coffee with? I've done this to you. I say it like I'm doing something bad to you. Hopefully it was not as unpleasant as I'm making it. But who out there in the world can I talk to about this weird, I've got this weird good guy guarantee issue. I know Josh from LinkedIn. I know that he is kind of an expert on these. Let me shoot him a text and see if he can give me 10 minutes of his time. And for me, I found that that blossoms into professional relationships, professional friendships, and definitely back and forth referrals of business, but with no expectation of it, right? Have you experienced any of that dynamic? I know your firm is not super small, but I wonder if coming from Weil, that I don't know how big Weil is, hundreds of people, maybe thousands, many different offices, international, to a much more local New York City firm with, I imagine you guys are on one floor in a building in the city. Have you experienced any of that dynamic or that phenomenon where you start to build relationships with people outside of the firm because you kind of need to?
Yeah, I mean, I think that definitely happens, right? For example, we don't really do bankruptcy work. I've represented some landlords and creditors in bankruptcy cases, but Whenever I talk about bankruptcy, I tell all the bankruptcy lawyers I hate bankruptcy. I can't stand bankruptcy. But I have clients that have bankruptcy related issues, right? Someone owes them money and the person files for bankruptcy. So a lot of outreach related to bankruptcy, related to some of the residential landlord tenant. I've got a guy that I call on, these super nuanced landlord tenant issues, and he always knows the answer. So
I probably know that guy.
yeah, I think you do. So, yeah, I mean, being at a smaller firm, you definitely have to do that. I mean, we have a fairly diverse practice on the litigation side.
Yep.
I mean, we have a white collar practice. We have
You can usually find someone internally to talk to, but if you can't, you build your network externally, and that sort of, could be another facet of business development right there, at least in my experience.
Oh, absolutely.
So you have an article on the website. I think I read this a while ago. Did I defraud my 3-year-old? Did you? And what's the story behind that?
Well, so the punchline was I did defraud him, but he had no damages against me. So
Or he had $1 in damages?
yeah. So it was an article I wrote a couple of years ago. I thought it was I thought it was this great idea because I promised my 3-year-old, who's by the way is 7 at this point, but I promised my 3-year-old something if he would take his medicine. And, really the analysis, I knew I wasn't giving him anything for taking
Present intention not to perform under this deal.
Correct. So I had a present intention not to perform. Now as you know, there's plenty of case law holding that non-performance is not the same as fraud, right?
That's the fight. In every breach of contract case, someone brings a fraud claim, right? And this is always the fight. Is it just the breach of contract, or did you actually defraud someone? I guess in your scenario, probably New York courts would hold that's probably fraud, wouldn't they?
Right. So the issue was that I knew when I told him I was going to give him the prize, I knew that not only was I not going to give him the prize, but I didn't even have a prize to give him. Right. So that was the idea, was that I was making a representation that there was a prize and I was planning to give it to him when I knew that wasn't true. And
special treat?
Correct. A special treat, a reward. There was no special treat. There was no prize. And he relied on it. Right. He ultimately took the medicine and in reliance on my promise. And, was it reasonable for him to rely on that promise? Well, I give him treats for other things. So, why was this any different? Did he do his diligence? I'm not sure that my 3-year-old, was a sophisticated party that had to do diligence. But ultimately, this is an issue that comes up in many cases. What is the measure of your damages, right? So in my case, the idea was, well, yeah, he had to take his medicine, but the medicine actually helped him rather than hurt him, and therefore he has no damages against me, even if I did commit fraud. But that is an issue that comes up in a lot of cases, and I'm sure you see this too, especially in commercial litigation. Somebody says, well, this person did X, Y, and Z to me, but what loss have you suffered as a result of this?
What about the value of the special treat?
Well, the value, so with fraud, the damages are not what you would have gotten had the contract been performed, right? They're not expectation damages. It's the difference between what you put in minus what you got.
So you're saying he was materially better off. It was a net positive for him.
Correct. And I've had fraud cases where I've been on the losing end of that, where the response is basically you haven't suffered any damages, or you haven't proven that you suffered damages because you're not actually worse off at the end of it. And a lot of people think, well, I was defrauded into thinking X, Y, and Z, and therefore I should get the X, Y, and Z. But that's not the measure of fraud damages. It's what you put in minus what you got. With my son, what he put in was taking the medicine, and therefore, because had he not been defrauded, he wouldn't have taken the medicine. So the difference between those two things, he actually was better off having taken the medicine than not.
So you've just assured yourself that next time I have a weird fraud case or a weird duplicative contract fraud question, which might be like next month, you know who I'm going to call for that.
I look forward to it.
You brought it on yourself. All right. So I think we're sort of getting to the end of the allotted time here, but why don't you just tell us once more a little bit about, for our listeners, a bit about your practice, what your specialties are, if there's any niche that you're kind of like really excited about, and where you're trying to take your practice over the next, couple of years.
So I think with the commercial lending litigation, we haven't seen the end of it. We're not even approaching the end. There was a lot of extend and pretend over the last couple of years, which is lenders extending the maturity dates out. And, the pretend part pretending that these loans are going to be capable of being serviced or paid off. I think a lot of that is ending now.
Kicking the can on foreclosures, basically.
Correct. That's what was happening over the last few years. And now, especially with interest rates kind of remaining stable and the values, at least of office properties, not coming back, a lot of lenders are realizing I can't kick it another 2 years. I have to deal with this problem now. So we are seeing a lot more commercial real estate. We are seeing a lot more distress in the commercial real estate market, in particular in the office space. We see a lot of foreclosures, a lot of UCC foreclosures. I really like UCC foreclosures. Unlike a mortgage foreclosure, it's a non-judicial process, can be completed in about 60 days usually. Very difficult if you're on the borrower side to.
That's like a millisecond in New York litigation world. 60 days, sign me up.
It's not litigation. It's a non-judicial process, right? So you send out a notice and then you conduct a marketing and sale process and then you do the sale. And most of the time, at least in the cases I'm involved, there's some type of attempt to stop the foreclosure at the last second, but it's very difficult to do. We speak of damages. To get an injunction stopping a foreclosure, you have to show not that you're going to be harmed by the foreclosure, but that you're going to be irreparably harmed, meaning in a way that money damages can't remedy. And there's pretty strong case law in New York holding that if you lose a commercial investment, even if it's an interest in real property, that's something that can be remedied by money damages. So I've got cases where borrowers try to stop UCC foreclosures. For the most part, we've been successful in batting down those challenges and moving forward with the foreclosures. And then after the foreclosure is completed, you might have litigation for the money damages. Was the process done in a proper way? Was it commercially reasonable? Was the price too low? And so on.
All right. So this is your thing. You're on the lender and the borrower side, or you primarily
Correct.
represent lenders?
I would say it's probably about 50-50 now. So, and it's fun being, certainly more fun being on the lender side, but it's fun being on both sides because I can tell lender client, well, if I were the borrower, here's the challenge that I would be making. And here's how I think we can protect against that. And if I'm on the borrower side, I'm telling my client, look, if I'm the lender, this is what I'm doing. And here's how we can try to rebut that.
If anyone had any doubts about your enthusiasm for this area of the law, I think you just put that to bed. So, Josh, really good having you on. We'll have to do this again in a few months, maybe make it a regular thing.
Thanks for having me.
For more on all things real estate and the law, subscribe to this and our other podcasts. Follow Bergstein, Flynn, Knowlton, and Pollina on social media. Subscribe to our newsletter and go to bfklawoffice.com. That's bfklawoffice.com to learn more.